Hey, I'm Will, game designer, author, dungeon master, guy that worked on the Elder Scrolls Online for 13 years. Ever wanted to run a campaign with dozens or even hundreds of players? No. We don't do that here. Knock it off. Eventually, every GM wonders what it would be like to have two different groups in the same game interacting through notes and seeing each other's impact on the world. In practice, doing this without a plan usually results in a confusing mess. Doing it well requires a careful touch, special procedures, and even fiction that supports multiple groups. But as always on this channel, let's start with some history. If you haven't seen this video by Questing Beast, you should watch it. Link in the doobly-doo. But to summarize, Gygaxian D&D was meant to be played by dozens of players in a shared world with many different groups playing asynchronously, more or less in real time. If a week elapsed in the real world between games, a week should elapse in the game world if no play was happening. This style of play still survives today in the form of open table games, which we'll talk about in a moment, but these Gygaxian era campaigns suffered some problems of their own. Gygax envisioned multiple groups playing in the same world with overlapping timetables. In his video, Questing Beast describes a situation where one group might reach a dungeon, solve most of it, and then another group swoops in and steals the treasure at the end. These kinds of interactions create a world that feels alive, but the first group might not know who stole its treasure, or even know that it had been stolen at all. To them, the treasure room is simply empty. Nor is it obvious to the second group that someone else solved most of the dungeon. To them, they just found a dungeon with lots of dead baddies, a dead boss, and an untouched treasure room. Lucky them. Also, because different groups were expecting to operate on their own timelines, events could get out of order. The real problem is exploration. Dungeon expeditions usually advance the campaign clock by relatively little. But once you're out exploring the wilds, weeks or months can fly by in a single session. How do you keep that straight with multiple groups? One could spend a week in a dungeon while another is months ahead in the wilderness. First edition AD&D contains an answer. I won't bore you by reading the whole thing, but summarized. Gygax prefers DMs to keep strict time records of everything and to resolve ordering conflicts in the fiction. Quote, being aware of time differences between groups of player characters will enable you to prevent the big problems. You will know when the adventuring of one such group has gone far enough ahead in game time to call a halt. End quote. This is, obviously, a very onerous solution to the problems introduced by groups playing out of sync. And it can result in groups having to stop playing or switch to another character kept in a stable. Neither is ideal. Let's return to open table games. There's a great multi-part blog post by the Alexandrian about running open table games from 2016. In it, among many other things, Justin explains the kinds of systems and goals that work for open table games and how time management should work. A good open table game is easy to explain and quick to generate characters in. Note that it doesn't have to be a simple game, it just has to gel quickly. The example he gives is D&D 3rd edition. Because once you explain the core mechanisms, play is easy. I'm not sure I'd agree with that assessment today, but we're talking about an era when players were more comfortable with complex and harder to enter games. Today, good examples might be games like Nimble or Shadowdark. Additionally, the premise should allow groups to split off and go in different directions. That simplifies managing interactions between parties. The plot should also explain why random assortments of characters keep coming together. Maybe they belong to the same adventuring guild and get assembled for broad goals like spreading goodwill by solving people's problems. These are all good, tried and true solutions. But let's take a closer look at time management. This is the same timekeeping problem we had in first edition AD&D back in 1979, almost 40 years later in 2016. When the session is longer than or about the same length as the time that elapses in-game, things work fine. But as soon as session length is much shorter than game time, parties begin overlapping in their timelines. This creates timeline paradoxes, where one later group's actions conflict with another group's actions before they happen. The proposed solution? Rigorous timekeeping, locking down characters who get too far ahead, and keeping a stable of characters players can switch to. The same solution Gary came up with. I find these solutions unsatisfying for a number of reasons. First, while I don't mind lots of work, the note-taking needed to maintain rigorous timelines slows down games. If the records are loose, as they will be for most DMs, the gaps compound into complicated nests that have to be untangled in the middle of a session, usually without everyone involved being present. Justin reports that this required virtually no effort in his campaign. I think that depends heavily on the GM, the style of play, and how interconnected the campaign becomes. With modern expectations around pacing and roleplay, in my experience, this can become untenable very quickly. Second, keeping replacement characters for when progress is halted, whether communal or in each player's back pocket, creates problems of its own. A, it directly interrupts whatever story was happening when the characters got halted. B, a lot of players today want to stick with one character for the long haul and really get into their head. And C, it feeds back into the timeline paradox problem it was meant to solve in the first place. No, on this point, I don't think a roster fixes the issue. It just produces a tighter knot to untie later. Third, none of these solutions address a deeper problem with multi-group games, a problem we haven't even addressed yet. In fact, these solutions actively make it worse. Player character death. PC death is a bigger problem for games with many players than you realize. Modern role-playing is deep. Many players want to embody their characters, and if they should die, want that death to be meaningful and important. This presents challenges of its own, but mechanically it exacerbates a problem that has floated under the surface for years without being adequately addressed. Metagaming and meta-knowledge. Back in the day, role-playing was often pretty minimal. For many groups, you were less embodying a character and more watching how that character progressed. Over time, the hobby became more and more role-play focused. Critical Role, Stranger Things, and the broader actual play boom also introduced D&D to a huge audience with little connection to its original play culture. We went from games where meta-knowledge and metagaming were simply part of the expected landscape to games where GMs work hard to keep player knowledge and character knowledge aligned. Why? Because the less work you have to do separating what you know from what your character knows, the more immersed you can be in that character. This creates tension in multi-group and open table games, and that tension is highest when a PC dies. Every time a player changes characters, they have to learn someone new and remember what this character knows and doesn't know compared with the last one. In a small, close-knit group, that burden can be shared. In a larger group that changes regularly, it becomes almost entirely the player's responsibility. And that can lead to player dropout when a character dies or gets locked down. I think we can do better. Recently, I ran a week-long campaign at Dan Wells' Game Night Getaway. Dan is Brandon Sanderson's co-host on Intentionally Blank and VP of Narrative at Dragonsteel. He oversaw Dragonsteel's narrative work on the Cosmere RPG and wrote its flagship adventure. 19 players logged almost 70 hours of session time in my campaign over that week. A handful of PCs died, and those deaths were handled smoothly. Parties were random, sometimes changing by the hour in a drop-in, drop-out format. Nobody had to wait or took more than a few minutes to join. New players were introduced in under 5 minutes, and integrated into whatever group was playing without issue. Characters sacrificed themselves, legends spread by word of mouth. The players created a home base without coordinating outside the game. And there was total clarity about what was meta and what wasn't. How? I created an 8-page zine. It is essentially free, pay what you want on DriveThruRPG or itch, and it explains everything. Let's rejigger our problems. First, managing meta-knowledge gets harder and more disruptive with more players and more character changes. Second, jumping around a timeline creates confusion and causality knots. Third, modern expectations around role-playing make changing characters a hard sell. So let's solve them. Any good solution must remove the need to manage meta-knowledge and make that solution part of the fiction, not an arbitrary procedure. It must eliminate time jumping and the disparity between someone playing every session and someone playing once a year. It should support modern role-playing without requiring character changes, ideally while making death less of a problem. To solve all of these, I present the Glass Echo. The Glass Echo is a glass skeleton that visits each PC before they enter the game for the first time. It tells them that they have been marked for a great purpose. If that PC dies, the player's next character inherits the first character's memories when they, too, are visited by the Glass Echo. Whenever a player leaves the table and stops playing, their character becomes an indestructible obsidian statue. Finally, the Glass Echo moves those statues around. They always end up in groups matching the players currently at the table. Yes, that's it. How does it solve all of our problems? First, it solves meta-knowledge by making knowledge from a player's previous characters explicitly part of the narrative. It also eliminates character stables. Second, it solves time jumping and unequal playtime by keeping the timeline in order and freezing PCs whenever their players are away. The timeline can't get out of sync because it always perfectly aligns with the players at the table. Reality and the game align, so the paradoxes never form. Finally, the same mechanism supports modern roleplay. Players don't change characters just because they miss sessions, and death is solved as a bonus. Don't like the specific narrative elements? Reskin it. Rework the details to fit your setting or campaign framework. I give examples in the zine, but here's what I did at the game night getaway. I kept the overall structure, but replaced the Glass Echo with the campaign's BBEG. I also changed the volcanic theme to frost. The Glass Echo became Fern Halo, an angel held in a prison of ice, and instead of turning into obsidian statues, the characters became magical blue ice. Fern Halo wanted the PCs to use the gifts she gave them to free her, either intentionally or by attacking her and inadvertently releasing her when she died, unless they killed her under exactly the right circumstances, which they did. And that's it. The link to the Glass Echo, along with everything else we've discussed, is below in the doobly-doo. It is pay what you want. Go get it for free. If you like the video, hit the dislike button. Tell me how bad I smell in the comments. Don't subscribe unless you mean it. And as always, I've been Will Brawl.